right, can everyone hear me? It is my pleasure to introduce Neha Sharma, a respected speech and language pathologist with extensive experience and a passion for working with children with multiple disabilities. I have known Neha both professionally and personally for several years and have always been impressed by the creativity, heart, and skill that she brings to her work. Neha has worked in many different settings here in the US, in private clinics and public schools, and is currently serving children with multiple disabilities and vision impairments at the Perkins School for the Blind here in Massachusetts. Neha, as I know her, is committed to helping not just her students, but is very dedicated about working with families to ensure that alternate communication strategies are carried across all settings. Neha will be sharing her passion and her insightful experiences with us today and helping us understand a topic that I know we're all really curious about. I know for myself personally, during my visit to Aravind Eye Hospital in Madurai last year, I had the opportunity to work with children with low vision and different kinds of vision impairments at the our low vision center in Madurai. And what I really found was that these children were not just visually impaired. I would say over 90% of the students that I saw there had multiple disabilities. And, I came back feeling like there was something more we should be looking and, really looking at the whole child. So I think Neha's topic today is really going to enlighten all of us. And she's going to help us understand the best practices for communicating with these children with multiple disabilities and vision impairment. So I'll turn it over to Neha. Welcome, Neha.
Right, thank you so much. That was an awesome introduction. So yes, I have been at the Perkins School now for 2 years, and I am at the Deafblind Program. So that works with students that have dual sensory impairments, and the vision impairments are pretty significant with our students. So I'm very excited to share with you what we are doing there. I feel like there are some awesome things that we can do to really support our students and really help with their communication. So what I would like to talk about today, just very briefly, are some basic communicative functions that we are addressing that are going to be functional for our students, and then how we are communicating with these students that have MDVI. And I think an important aspect of what we do and how we are assessing our process and moving forward is how are we assessing the child? And we want to really look at them instead of just their diagnosis or whatever their paper tells us. And so that is something that I'm just going to be briefly talking about, but it's a very important aspect that we have to keep in mind. And then the bulk of the presentation really will be some accommodations and strategies that you can take home today and really start working on with your students. So I hope that there are going to be some things that are going to be useful for you by the end. So first, I would just like to mention the MDVI, multiple disabilities with vision impairment, and I'm sure you all know that it is a result for many different things. It could be for syndromes, congenital abnormalities, trauma, and along with that, they have these impairments with their vision that could be ocular or CVI. And I know that last week there was a wonderful lecture by Dr. Barry Cran, who actually is also at the Perkins School, and he really did discuss CVI, the cerebral vision impairment, and all of the way that they present. And I will be talking about that a little bit, not in too much detail. But one of the things that I did want to point out is that our students with multiple disabilities really also have this dual sensory impairment, this deaf blindness, and that is a complete or even a partial loss of 2 or more of their senses. And typically it's vision and hearing. And that is really important to understand because vision and hearing are so important for language learning, for academic learning, and for them to be an active participant in their community. So our students with these disabilities really have this loss that we have to help them move past it and figure out ways to help overcome that. These students are considered deafblind if that combined sight and hearing impairment really cause that difficulty with access of information, like I had said. And it's really difficult to really make sure that we can understand that this dual sensory impact really can have lasting impacts on the student. It doesn't mean that they're 100% deaf and 100% blind. They all come in varying degrees. And so that's an area that we really need to understand more about. Very briefly, what is CVI? It's a brain-based visual impairment. And I know that this was brought up last week as well, but it's really from damage of the visual cortex of the brain, the visual pathways, or even sometimes both. And it can occur with or without ocular impairments. And so that's really important for us to understand is why or how this visual impairment is really impacting them. And there are ways to test for that. I mean, you can see down here, there are brain imaging available for that, but really there is a CVI range, and that is the assessment tool. And it really looks at a lot of different characteristics. There are 10 characteristics that are pretty unique to CVI. And it really looks at the degree of where they fall. And there's a scale, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. I'm not going to go into huge detail about that, but I would just like to point out that CVI is really a visual recognition problem. It's not always that they can see it. Just because they can look, it does not mean that they see. And what it really is that they really have difficulty making sense of what they see, that processing piece of the visual information. So they may have perfect acuity, but they still present or function like they can't see, and that is because their brain can't process it. And so we really need to look at how can we help them adapt and train and teach them to be able to use their vision more functionally. And one of the most amazing things about CVI is that with proper intervention and accommodations, that it can be improved. Their vision can be improved, and that is huge given the plasticity of the brain. So that is something that we take in consideration as well when we're looking at communicative needs and learning abilities. And I just wanted to point that out as well. So the basic communicative functions that we really want to make sure our students have the ability to convey is, like all human beings, they want or they should be able to interact socially, make requests, refuse or reject things, expressing preferences and feelings and choices, making comments, giving information. Those are all our basic human rights as for communication. And we want to make sure that just because our students have limited access or that may not be able to show us in conventional ways their communication, we want to make sure that we're fostering this, because we call this the Communication Bill of Rights, and their wants, needs, thoughts should always be honored if possible and appropriate, and validated with a response that we did receive their message. It may not be always possible, like, no, you cannot go get a snack at 9 o'clock at night, but I did receive your message, and they can then move on from there. And I think that it's important to understand that our students with these disabilities are humans at the end of the day, and they have a right to all of these functions. And so our job is to help them access that and help them become active communicative partners, be active in their communities, in their environments, and have that sense of self. And so how do we do that? Communicating with those with MDVI is challenging, but it's so doable. And an approach that we use is total communication. And this is using a combination of many different modes all at the same time. So we would be speaking verbally, we might be signing as well, we might be referencing a symbol or a picture at the same time. We're using nonverbal communication, and this is so important for our students because they have this sensory loss dual sensory loss, and we want to make sure that we can give them as much as we can so that they can use their other senses to help. So why total communication? Well, we want to give exposure to these multiple modalities because some students might be better at signing, others are better at speaking, others are using symbols or devices. And when you're in a classroom, we want to make sure that everybody has access to everything and we're on equal footing so they can be active participants. We want to support their receptive language. You know, they may have a loss in hearing or vision, but they may have some residual hearing and vision. So we want to be able to make sure they can access whatever they do have and maximize on that. Expressively, students may communicate using multiple modalities, and we want to accept that, we want to foster that, and then we will help shape all of their communication attempts and make it so that they are able to use that more independently. Like I said before, there's a lot of different modes that we are using constantly with our students, and I think it's important to try all of them and then start honing in as they become more comfortable in figuring out which modalities are going to be best for them going forward. So like I said, it was a combination, and we want to make sure that we can be as effective as possible. And sometimes for one activity or for one task, a student might sign, and for another activity, they may use their tactile symbols, or some may use vocalizations or some single words, while others may use whole objects for other tasks. And so we want to make sure that they can be successful at all times. And this is an approach that can be used for many populations, and it's really shown to be quite effective for these students. They learn quicker, they feel more comfortable, they feel empowered, and we have to think of ourselves. I think we are all multimodal communicators. I'm speaking, but I'm using facial expressions, I'm using hand gestures, and I think that's something that we have to keep in mind as well, is it's not just one mode, and giving them access to as much as possible will really help them learn and access much more of their environment. Here are some examples of some tools that we use for communication. Like I said before, we can use whole objects to help them learn a system, but these are up here at this corner are tangible symbols, and those tend to be a little more abstract. Sometimes we use whole objects or partial objects. Sometimes we use an abstract representation. For example, it looks like here that's a button, and that can symbolize, you know, maybe it's time to get dressed for one student, but it could also symbolize another type of activity for another student. So all of these are tailored per student and individualized for them. These are mid-tech devices here that they are used for messages, single messages, multiple messages here, this single switch here as well. And then down here is the high-tech devices. So we're talking our communication devices, iPads, certain apps or computer programs that students can use too. So this is just a little example of all the different types of communication methods we have, in addition to signing and pictures and objects and all of that. So some best practices. These are some important strategies that you can take away today and really know how to start interacting with your students. And for the most importantly, I think it's important for us to realize we're assessing the child and not the diagnosis, like I had said before. I have many students that appear one way on their paperwork and actually present a completely different way functionally. So it's important to see the child and remember that behavior is communication. What is this child trying to say, and how are they trying to say it? How are they conveying their message? For example, in this picture, and they're not speaking at all, but I could probably tell exactly what they're trying to communicate. And I think that's important to understand too, is that we really need to look at how the child is presenting functionally on a day-to-day basis. And one of the areas that we really look at is the functional vision assessment. This is a very important tool to help us realize on a day-to-day basis for certain tasks how is that child using that vision? I know that I have a student right now whose acuity looks horrendous on a piece of paper, yet she's able to see pictures, make choices from pictures, watch videos and comment on videos. And so it doesn't quite match what the paper says, but based on our vision assessment and our behavioral observations, we were able to say, okay, now we need to know where we're going to go. If we had gone with just the paper information, we wouldn't have been able to give the student a robust communicative system. So I just wanted to put out there, this is really important, is to look at the whole child and see how they are presenting before making any decisions. Okay, so here are some strategies that I think it's important to keep in mind. This is one of my new favorites, is active learning, and really that's the experiential learning. Our students with these multiple disabilities and dual sensory loss, they really lose out on that incidental learning. So typical sense students really observe their surroundings, they're watching others, they're listening to their peers say answers or conversations with other people, they're overhearing things. They might be outside hearing an airplane go by and start mapping onto that's an airplane, it flies in the sky. And our students with deaf blindness and multiple disabilities can't really access that type of learning. So we really need to think that they need direct instruction, they really need to be explicitly taught certain things, and they need the experience. And we need to provide that experience for them. So actually one of the approaches that we're starting to look at more so for a number of our students is called active learning. And this is an approach that's based off of the work of Dr. Lily Nielsen. And it refers to an approach that really looks and supports the learner to be active participants in their surroundings. And we typically see this for our infants and toddlers where they might take something, drop it off the table, watch it go down, do that again and again, or they, tap on a ball and it moves and they like that and they'll do it again and again. And that's their understanding of, okay, if I do this, something happens and I like that and I'm going to keep doing, and now I've learned that this action can create this effect. And so that cause and effect is really important for our early communicators because that's actually the basis of communication. That cause and effect, that I say something and somebody can go do something that I want or don't want. And that is an area that we are starting to now apply for many of our students. And just because our students are 4, 14, or 24 years old, we can still apply this if they are at that developmental level. And I think that this is an important way to have the students build a sense of self, build a sense of belonging and understanding their body in space, and that they can have an effect on outside of their body. And this is an area that we are actually using a lot more now. So using predictable routines, schedules and calendar systems are going to be important for our students. They need to kind of have an idea of what's coming next so that they can process that information. Repetition is huge for our children. They need much more repetition or practice on certain skills than some of our typically sensed students. So we have to keep that in mind as well. Like I said, total communication is very important, and actually hand under hand is important. And I don't know how much of you are familiar with that, but hand over hand is, if this is the student's hand, the instructor's hand is manipulating that student to do things. Now, the control is all in the instructor. So hand under hand would be that the instructor's hand goes under the student's hand and can help guide the student to whatever action or task that's happening. And all the while, the student has the right and the ability to pull away and say, I don't want to do this right now. And that's a communicative attempt as well. So hand under hand is very important because we want our students to want to learn and to have a positive experience. If we are constantly manipulating them like this, they can't pull away, they may get frustrated, and it creates a negative environment. So hand in hand instruction is going to be very important for our students as well. Wait time. Wait time can be significant for our students. Waiting is hard, and waiting silently is even harder. But we want to make sure that our students have enough time to process what is asked of them and then formulate a response and then do the action or do the task. So it can be anywhere from 2 or 3 seconds to up to a minute. And it's a very long time to wait, but it's important because our students need that. And it's respectful for them, for us to understand that they need that extra time and that we want to give it to them. We want to make concepts as concrete as possible. And this example here is use of a finished box. So the concept of being finished with something is pretty abstract. Especially for our students that have these sensory losses. It's hard for them to understand if a task is finished or if an item is finished, you put it away, but they can maybe still see it peripherally or still touch it. It's not really finished because it's still there. So what we want to do is create a way to make that a concrete concept. So this bucket is that an item can move from the task, from the green bucket, you're playing with it, you're manipulating it, and then when you're done, it goes into the red bucket and then the bucket moves away. So now the item is completely out of sight, but that action of putting it into the bucket is that finished act. So now that child knows that that is what finished means. It goes in the bucket, it's done, and it moves away. And so that's just an example of how to make concepts concrete. It's difficult, but our students need that. And so now I'd love to talk about some of the material and environmental accommodations that we use for students with vision impairments. So some of the material accommodations that I'm going to talk about are based on some of the 10 characteristics of CVI. I'm not going to go into all of them, but what I would like to say is that they are super beneficial and really research-based for CVI, but they really can be used for other ocular and vision impairments as well. And of course, the first one that is probably most typical is enlarging your print, providing contrast backgrounds as needed. And that also is very dependent on the student, their needs and preferences. Some might need this light blue black background, but some might need a black background with white lettering or yellow lettering. So that's another piece of information that you can find out from your functional vision assessment, from conversations with other staff members and family. And that will be important too, to see how we are going to create our communication materials for them. Color is very important. Oftentimes students with CVI and even sometimes other ocular impairments may have preferred colors that they are drawn to and that draw their visual attention. So we want to be very systematic and thoughtful in how we might use that color to help them draw their visual attention to things for their communication boards or devices. So we want to select objects or symbols or pictures that have very few and simple colors. We want to make sure that they are not visually overwhelmed. So for example, at the bottom here, these two symbols, they mean very different things, but because they're relatively the same size, almost a little bit of the same shape, same color, it's very difficult to discern what that is. Same with something like you have this array here where you have so many items, they're all similarly colored, very multicolored. It's almost impossible for our students to really locate something that they might need. So what we want to do is use color to highlight. So we might highlight a border to draw the visual attention to that actual photo. And then we may also highlight part of the object or photo so that the visual attention is drawn to this particular portion of that item. And then the student can recognize, oh, that's my favorite yogurt that I like. We also may use color over here. This is a pipe cleaner, and it's used on their mid-tech device here to help draw the visual attention to the certain item that we would want them to look at. Movement is also a really important piece to help draw visual attention and also encourage that central vision use, visual detail. Oftentimes our students don't really have that, and that's why facial recognition is difficult, and things that have multiple components to an object is difficult for them to discern. And so we want to draw their visual attention in a different way as well. And so we can use movement. So we can take an object and we can shake it. And that little bit of movement draws their attention, and then they can now focus on that one item. Another way we do that is using this material Mylar, and we might put that on an object. We might put it on a photo or a symbol to highlight it. A lot of times we have a little piece over a hook, like in their classroom where they go to put up their jacket so that they know exactly where they're going. And that shiny material gives the illusion of movement because of the way the light bounces off of it. So we might not be able to shake the entire cubby or the hook on the wall, but if we put this on there, it's enough for the student to use their attention with that shiny piece. Objects are complex. There's a lot of components to an object. And so when we are looking to figure out, is the student going to be using whole objects or partial objects or symbols that have pieces of objects on them, we want to really think about what type of objects we're using. Obviously, single colored objects are preferred. That's not always possible. For example, the picture on here is a very favorite toy, but it's pretty complex because of the shapes and the colors. And so movement, again, will help the brain identify a multicolored object as a single object because everything moves together. Simple black backgrounds are great. Where this therapist is wearing a black apron to provide that contrast. Another really important piece is as our students become more advanced in their language skills, we want to start mapping on some salient features. So we want to talk about objects and material with these salient features that will help the student identify and learn that object and create a concept of that object. So usually 3 or fewer is all our students can handle. We want to present the object, allow the student time to look at it without us speaking, which is very hard to do. And what we want to do is we want to look at these salient features. So for example, red, small, skinny legs. What am I talking about? It's very difficult to think of what that could be because these features are ones that can change for an object. But if I said wings, beak, feathers, okay, those invariant features point to a bird. But if I had said red, small, skinny legs, a bird may be blue. A bird may be huge, like an eagle. A bird may have fat legs. So we want to really figure out what parts of that object is going to be invariant and can really be used to help our students learn that individual item and then the class of items. And that helps build their vocabulary and their concept knowledge as well. So for example, this drawing here, this image has very simple lines. And so we might think, oh, that's the simplest drawing and that is going to be very easy to discern visually. But it's actually pretty visually abstract because we would never really see this type of facial feature or position of the head and the spoon this way without the hand that's actually grabbing it. So it's quite difficult. So what would be better for our students especially is to take a photo of the actual item that the student is using, or even glue that item onto a backing like cardboard or wood for a tactile symbol, and it's their actual objects. It's the actual spoon that the child eats with, that's familiar with, and that will bring way more meaning to that particular object and symbol, and then from there they can build and create a whole system for communication. So those were some of the ideas for materials and some environmental accommodations, again, based on CVI, but these are going to be important to help you set up your learning spaces. So one of the biggest things is understanding our students' visual field. Which visual field is best for them, which ones are poor and we need to avoid. And so we want to make sure that we really take in consideration their positioning so that they don't have to use their visual fields that's not their preferred. And so using a slant board, and this is actually a board where this has a little shelf right here, and it's about 6 inches off the table. And that really minimizes the need for the lower visual field. And a lot of our students have that deficit. And so we're really bringing it up to eye level. We may shift everything to one side, depending on where their preferred visual field is. And we want to make sure that we're using few items. And so that comes to the complexity of the array. And we want to make sure that our students can actually access and understand all the different items that are presented to them. And if there are too many, they will not see it. They might see it as one big thing, or they might see half. So we really want to figure out, how do we find their array? How do we find their appropriate number? And what we really want to do is, can they find their favorite item in a certain number of items, so in a certain array? We might start with 4, we might start with 6, and we keep reducing until that student 100% of the time reaches 4 and grabs their favorite item. And that's what we know is their array that they can handle. So we want to reduce the array, but we also want to, in a methodical way, increase the array, but we want to start with the lowest array possible, making sure the items are spaced far apart and with clear separations between symbols or objects. And again, we can use our colored lines for that, the colored pipe cleaner. And one of the other areas that is going to be really helpful for our students is partner-assisted scanning. And this could be through sign or spoken language as well, is that there's a partner sitting with them, kind of going through that array with them to help them understand each item. For example, this is a very large array, and it's one of the standards that come on one of our communication devices, but we can really go through and we can say, okay, how do you feel today? Do you feel good? Bad? Fine? And we're giving pauses so that they can process it. And they might be able to tell us yes when they hear the one they want or that they want to use as a response. And so that's a way that we can help give them access as well, especially when these backgrounds and arrays are very complex. I have another couple videos, but this is about the sensory environment. We have to also understand that they have a sensory loss, but when you put too many sensory things within their environment, it becomes overwhelming and it is very hard to start separating. So we want to control the auditory, tactile, visual distractions, especially when looking is required. We want to be quiet and we want to describe salient features, but the biggest challenge, I think, is we want to keep all of our prompting and our like, yay, good job, and all of that to a minimum, because they really need to focus. And their physical positioning is also very important, and we must consult with the PT, because if they are struggling to sit up straight, their vision is going to be poor. Another area that we can think of when we are setting up our space is light. And if light is a distraction to our students, a lot of times students with CVI in the early phases are still light gazing, which means they get very drawn into the light and that's all they're looking at. And so we want to close shades, face students away from lighted hallways or windows. We can dim or shut off ceiling lights. We could put filters, and that's the picture here. We have a student down here that is really looking up at the lights and almost so distracted that she's unable to attend to anything else. And so then we put these covers on the lights so that it dims it and they can focus back onto the task. And especially with these students, we can use light to our advantage. We can have lighted components to the actual items, and that facilitates their visual attention. We can highlight objects with lights. We can use backlighting to help visual discrimination again also. And some of that lighting can really reduce the visual fatigue so that our students can participate in tasks a little bit longer as well. So here are some examples. Here's a lighted box where a student is trying to find her snacks, a lighted toy, and this is actually a desk lamp or a book light that's clipped behind the student so that he cannot light gaze into it, but it is shedding light on his objects that he is manipulating. So kind of bringing it all together, this is what our ideal therapy space looks like. It looks very plain. It looks like we don't have a lot of things, but it is done very systematically and mindfully for our students, as minimal distractions as we can. And the light and the color is really focusing on that visual attention to those items. And so that's what we want to accomplish here. So when we're choosing symbols, we want to make sure that our students can access it, obviously. And so we typically would start with three-dimensional objects, and then we move to two-dimensional. And it's pretty systematically taught and paired to promote that understanding. It's almost like teaching a new object every time. So here we have the item itself. Then the item is mounted on a backing as a symbol. And then we've taken a photo of that. And so then that way we can move from 3D to 2D. It's a long process for some of our students, but that then opens the door for more symbol use. And down here is just a little hierarchy of the easiest to hardest to process for our students, and in general, visually process. Photographs are the easiest, especially if it's the actual object the student is using. And then realistic colored line drawing, colored drawing, and then black and white drawing. Black and white is the hardest for our students to understand. So that's the other kind of misconception, is that we think black and white's very simple, easy to process, but it's actually very hard. And here is why. When you have a real object, you have all of these features that, that you are visually taking in. Color, luminance cues, visual texture, the actual size of it, the salient features, and the context. As you move to photograph, colored illustration, and black and white line drawings, you can see how much is lost over these, over the progression. So this shows that the black and white line drawing is actually very difficult for our students, because not only do they miss out on the context that is so important, but now there's no color, there's no luminous cues. You can't really see the texture, and the size, of course, is lost. So something to keep in mind when we are picking symbols, and are we picking drawings or photographs, we really have to look at what that child's history is and what they really are going to be able to access visually. All right, so taking a good picture. This is something that I've had to kind of rethink multiple times as well. It's so much easier to think, okay, I'm going to take a quick picture and that's going to be the symbol. But we really want to look at the array, the background, the complexity, all of that, right? So we want to place the object on a plain background, the single object, make sure there's no other visual clutter in the background of the photo. We have to control for lighting, because if there's glare, the student may view that as a completely different object. We want to have to look at some contrast or saturation features on the computer. We want to border a photograph of this with the student's preferred colors so that that is highlighted and again draws the visual attention. And the best thing that is really difficult is to take the photo from the student's point of view. So their perspective is what they see, and that's what they recognize, and that's what they're going to process. So for example, what do we think this is? This is very difficult to kind of figure out. Could it be a lens? Could it be a Jello cup? Paint, watercolor? Okay, it's a glass with juice. But as you can see here, there's some glare. And this is as if you're looking at the object like from here, like this. And that is very difficult, and nobody looks at an object that way. So we really want to look at the perspective. This is how the student is seeing it while seated at the table with the item in front of them. And this is how we would take the picture. We really need to get down to their level. And if they're in a wheelchair versus a stander versus a certain other type of chair, are they lying down? We really need to look at that too while we take a picture. Some other things to consider for our students is their latency in vision. We want to know how long it takes them to turn and look at an item. And we don't want to prompt until that whole time has passed. And that's why that wait time is very important, is because they're not only processing the language piece of it, the task, and their environment, but they're also now processing their vision, the vision piece. And so that's going to be very important, is to figure out their latency. How long does it take a student to look? And then we want to know at what distance are they going to be best to access their materials. Usually it's within 12 inches of them, again, with the minimal background complexity. And we want to compensate for this inaccessible incidental learning. We want to name everything we see around us that may be farther for them. We want to narrate events or activities in the distance. And this is us teaching them directly. So, oh, I see that John just walked in the door. He's wearing a red coat. It looks like he's getting ready to wash his hands. And things like that will help our students understand and access what's around them, even though they can't necessarily visually access it. So we really want to be partners with them throughout the process. We really want to look at our students' motor and physical capabilities, their positions, their access points. Some students may use their hands and fingers, others may use their head. I've had students use their feet. We really need to figure that out, and working with the PT is going to be key here. Individualization is, I'm sure you all know, is so important. We need to figure out who that specific child is, how they're communicating with us, and what they need in order to access as much as they can of their environment and their communication. And so it might differ based on what CVI's phase they're in versus by their severity of their presentation. And you're rarely going to have two students that are going to have the same presentation. And that is why it is an interdisciplinary approach. It is very necessary to involve all the members of the team. And this is who they are. It's a lot, but everybody holds a very important part and piece of that student's programming. And I certainly can't do my job as a speech and language pathologist and come up with a communication system for a student without the OT. I don't know what their fine motor skills might be. I don't know what their core strength or sensory integration skills might be. I also can't really recommend a communication device without consult from the orientation mobility specialist, because I would want that student to carry around their communication device at all times, but will they be able to handle that and a cane, or are they in a wheelchair and not moving at all? Do we need to mount something? So really, the whole team needs to work together, and as the speech pathologist, I take everything in and then come up with a system that I think would be best, and really take in consideration all the other disciplines and what they feel is going to be beneficial for the student. At the end of the day, we want communication interactions as positive and enjoyable as possible. We want them to be excited, and we want them to initiate their conversations. We want them to take ownership of what they want to say, and then they have that right, and they have that that drive, and we want to foster that for our students. And so coming up with these systems is tricky, keeping in mind all of the accommodations and the materials that they might need to be successful can be very challenging, but at the end of the day, it is completely worth it, because our students can then say hi and say thank you, and it's great. So thank you so much. I have a couple resources here if you would like to check it out. Of course, the Perkins School for the Blind. The Active Learning is a really great website, activelearningspace.org. Wonderful examples and information about this approach for our students that have this sensory loss. And of course, my email as well. And this is us during this very strange time trying to conduct lessons. And that's it. That's all I have. If you have any questions, please let me know.
Thank you so much, Neha. That was just so much information. There's so much useful information. I really liked how you emphasize a total communication approach. I do feel that sometimes caregivers or others who interact with children, with multiple disabilities and vision impairments kind of just assume that the child, has impaired hearing and vision loss and therefore cannot communicate. It's just such an assumption
Mhm.
that, we come across. And I think you totally, gave us so many tools that, not to, first of all, not to assume that, look at the whole child. And there's so many ways that the child can communicate. I loved your accommodations. They seem simple, but they're just so critical for a student's success. Uh, and with not just with learning, but being able to receptively and expressively engage in communication. Those accommodations are useful just across the board. And sometimes we forget to use them when you're communicating as well. It's not just with teaching. So that was absolutely brilliant and very practical. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, I second that, and I think that this will be immensely useful. I'm going to have to watch it again to understand and get into the finer details of everything you said. But thank you so much. Yeah, I echo everything which Lubina said. And I see several people on the call, so we can actually open up for questions if anyone has any. I see Saranya has her mic unmuted. Do you have a question, Saranya?
Yeah, just to give feedback. It's a very good presentation, Neha. Thanks for you.
Thank you.
And I see it's very familiar, and so that I get more interest on to know that your strategy and what exactly participates there. So almost we are doing all the ways, particularly for the CVA case and children with CP here, and with any kind of syndrome which lead to multiple disabilities. I am very happy to meet people like doing very dedicated services and looking for creative ways to communicate the maximum level, because our job is to make everything possible. Even a child with 100 degree of disability, to look for the ways to communicate the child and to give possible teaching opportunities and to help the parents to come out of their frustration level for that so that they education properly. So it's very useful. I guess I had to share the link for my intern students also, so they may find it very useful since they're very freshers for entering into the field. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're very
And,
thank you.
and one more request. I would like to have a particular session for the teaching strategies for the severe deafblind children, like how to teach and how to use the actual modes of approaching and communicating with them. Say example, children with 100% of visual impairment and hard of hearing. So even our team is also very interested to know more strategies to deal with them, because we deal with many low vision children than completely blind children.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll be happy to have a particular session for the severe deafblind children who is 100% visually impaired and hard of hearing,
Sure.
particularly for the teaching strategies.
Yeah, we'll be in
Since
touch.
we all know Perkins are pioneers in dealing children with deaf blindness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good feedback, Saranya. Thank you. And we will organize that session which you are requesting. So we'll reach out to Neha and
Yeah,
set.
yeah. Actually, this session prompted me to ask this question.
Sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
Neha, just so you know, Saranya is the head of the Vision Aid Resource Center in Shankar Nethralaya and Chennai.
Okay.
We see a lot of children with MDVI, so she
Mhm.
and her team are very interested in learning strategies. So,
Of course.
at some point, I'll reach out to you and maybe you and Lubaina and others who are interested can get together and have this focused group session with them at some point.
Absolutely. Sounds good.
Yes, I do think that's, MDVI is a field, is a population that's often overlooked just because of the severity of their impairment. We have another participant, Azam Hussein, who's got a raised hand. You have a question?
Yes, hello. Thank you.
Hello.
Thank you for that talk. It was very informative. I enjoyed it a lot.
Thanks.
In the beginning, early in the talk, you had mentioned plasticity. I
Mhm.
was wondering if you run into any issues with reversing or even dampening some of the visual cognition in the older children with their less plastic brains, arguably? And if you use any special methods with the older kids versus the younger kids?
So for those types of students, we have to really look at, if you're talking about cortical vision impairment in general, we look at what phase they're in. And, you know, phase 1 is the most severe, and phase 3 is almost near typical vision. They still need accommodations, but we really look at what their functioning level is at that point. And it doesn't really matter age for our students. It's more about how they are functioning with their vision. And even for our older students, the right amount of accommodations and training and practice, it really still can improve their vision. So yes, plasticity does kind of decrease as students get older, but again, with that training and that accommodation, it still can ameliorate.
Saranya, you had a question?
Yeah, and actually, if I can just interrupt, Azam, would you mind introducing yourself? Like, where are you from?
Yeah, sorry about that. I was introduced to vision aid by Dr. Rizvi. He's one of my dad's friends, and they went to school together in Aligarh.
Oh.
Right now, I'm based in Gaithersburg, Maryland. I go to school in Philadelphia.
Okay, well, welcome. Thank you.
Nice to meet everyone.
Yeah, nice to see you.
Did that answer your question?
Yes, definitely. Thank you. That's actually exciting that you can even reverse some of those deficits in older children.
Excellent. Thank you. Good question. And I see Ali on the phone, but I don't see him with a microphone, so maybe he is not able to speak. So thanks for joining. Any other questions?
Neha, I had a question on active learning. I know it's, you know, in my visit to Perkins, I saw it was very popular there. It's used, you know, and I've looked at the Perkins website, and there's some great courses that Perkins offers on active learning. So I would encourage participants to, you know, explore that, as well as, of course, the active learning website. But do you know how prevalent active learning is in the general school environment? Is it more of a specialized MDVI, specialized school approach, or is that something that, say, our partners like at Shankar Nethralaya or Arvind can easily implement?
Absolutely, it can be very easily implemented. I don't think it's as widely used as it probably should be. And I think it's been around for a while, but I think just recently people are realizing how it can actually be used and help our students with these multiple disabilities, with these dual sensory losses. And I think that it really, if you look at the principles of it, it looks like infant learning and toddler learning, and we really can apply those at really any age. Any early communicative stage can apply that approach and really see some success with just kind of that early stage of cause and effect, the basics and foundations of language. And I think that some of our students that are more severely impaired actually show some success with volitional movement and some kind of facial expressions for realizations, where before they may not have looked like they can actually do any of that. And we are realizing now that we can apply this approach to these students and really see what their cognition is like and what we can do moving forward.
Yeah, thank you. That was very comprehensive. And I would really encourage people, because I know I've done, maybe Saranya can, you know, if you're still on, address that. I'm not sure that's an approach that, you know, is much talked about outside of here. I didn't see it in my work in India, so I was just wondering the prevalence of it.
Yeah, it's not quite prevalent as much as we would like, but that website, activelearningspace.org, is brilliant. There is so much information on there. There are tons of free courses and lectures that you can access, and there are very powerful videos on there that show the examples of what this approach can do.
Great.
Any other questions? Were there any questions in the chat?
A lot of positive comments for you, Neha, in the chat, but I think I'm not seeing any more questions.
Okay, while we are waiting for any final questions, I just want to mention that we have 3 more sessions announced. So this web page is VisionAid training.visionaid.org/webinars. So you can go here and get details. 3 sessions have been announced. Dr. Linda Lawrence from Kansas is a well-known ophthalmologist, and she's going to be talking about pediatric low vision next Monday at 10 p.m. in Boston. So that will be Tuesday, 7:30 a.m. in India. We've had several sessions, but we haven't really covered anything about vision aid. So I have been requested to deliver a talk. So I will be giving a talk about vision aid. That will be next Thursday, 10 p.m., Friday morning, 7:30 in India. And another exciting session is a talk by Dr. G.N. Rao, who's a very well-known, famous ophthalmologist. He founded the L.V. Prasad Eye Institute. He will be joined by the head of low vision at LVPI, Dr. Beulah Christie, and they will be talking about best practices in establishing and running a tertiary low vision center. So 3 more sessions coming up, and please stay tuned to this page for more sessions to be announced soon.
Hello, sir.
Yes, go ahead.
Sir, do I need to register the webinar separately?
No, if you already registered for one, you will get reminders for all, and you get registered for all of them. So no need for separate registrations.
Okay, okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Yeah, good question.
Neha, this is Bharti. That was a wonderful presentation. I know we do see quite many patients in our clinic who are deaf and blind, Chart syndrome and many other syndromes, the cortical visual impairment. But it's amazing you put so much effort, and then when they say thank you to us, we know where it comes from now. It was a wonderful talk, and I can imagine you need to put so much effort in to teach anything to them. Like it's really amazing, just because for us it's so simple that we have senses like vision and hearing. So probably for us it's so easy, but for them it's a struggle even to learn one single word. I think it takes so much effort from your side.
Yes, and it is all worth it in the end.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't think you could have said it better, Bharti. Neha, I think, I don't know if you remember, but Dr. Bharti Nehalani is also on the Vision Aid Board of Directors. She's a pediatric ophthalmologist at Boston Children's.
Okay.
But I want to add to what she says, and really, I mean, there's just so much that goes into it. Thank you for all you do. Very insightful presentation.
Thank you.